are once again at the very lovely and today very sunny corner of Glenwood and Lunt. We are in the heart of Rogers Park in Chicago. We are at the corner of Glenwood and Lunt. We are up on the stage at the Heartland Cafe, and this is another edition of Live from the Heartland. I am your host, Michael James, for this morning's edition on Saturday, October 4th. And we have a pretty good lineup today. We are actually broadcasting some new technical people here, and we've got everything seemingly working well. We're going to feature today Ron Sakolsky. He's the author of Seizing the Airwaves, a free radio handbook. Then we're going to have Jalen Neal of Partners for Rogers Park Community Development. And we're going to have About Face Theater's director Bonnie Metzger come up along with featured person at their theater, Taylor Mack, who has a one-man show, and then we're also going to have Amy Murata from the 8th Day Center for Justice, and we're going to talk about U.S.-Columbia Fair Trade, as it's called. Okay, let's get going. Good morning to you, Ron Sakolsky.
Yeah, good morning.
Ron, you know, you have a reputation that precedes you. You've been around a while. You work in pirate radio, and now you're up in Canada doing that, but you spent a good number of years, as I understand, down there in Springfield, Illinois, doing pirate radio with another famed pirate radioer. How about giving us a little background on that?
Yeah, well, in the late 80s, stations started up in Springfield out of housing projects. Started up by Ron Sakolsky, and I was working with him. I did a show there and helped him with the original setup, and he's still going strong. The FCC has come and stolen his transmitter many times, but he's still on the air. He keeps getting a new one.
Give us and our listeners a little picture, description of what pirate radio is all about. We've had a number of people on the show who have taken low-watt radio down to Central American countries. And, you know, I'm not a techie guy, but I'd like to know how it's done, because the notion of pirate radio really is wrong.
Yeah, I'm not a techie guy either, but I can tell you a little bit about why people would go low-watt. And low-watt is usually, we're talking about under 50 watts. Sometimes people expand that to under 100 watts. It's unlicensed radio. It's radio that people do because there's a need that's not being met, and decide that they want control over their ability to communicate with one another. So in Obama's case, he basically felt that the mainstream media, or as he called them, the white stream media, were not giving his point of view
Called the what?
The white stream
White stream media.
And so he felt he needed to represent his community. And right now I'm involved in a pirate radio station on a little island in British Columbia called Candian. And that's a community kind of grassroots station that people just put together to give themselves a voice.
How many pirate radio stations are there around in North America?
It's hard to say. It could be as many as 200-300. At any given time, the scene shifts and different people are doing stations or moving on to other things.
And what kind of resistance, so to speak, do pirate radio stations get from the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission?
Well, the main resistance is that they're operating without a license. So the FCC will come knocking on your door if there is a complaint. The complaints usually come from commercial radio stations who feel competition or feel that their signal is being impinged upon. It isn't always being impinged upon, but that's usually what they'll claim. They'll make a complaint to the FCC, and the FCC is obligated to investigate. What they do is they knock on your door and tell you to cease and desist. If you continue to broadcast, they can come back and steal your equipment, and if you still continue to broadcast, they can file civil charges against you, but that almost never happens.
We're talking with Ron Sakolsky on Live from the Heartland Radio on 88.7 WWW, Loyola University's community radio station. And Ron is the author of Seizing the Airwaves, a free radio handbook, which he has written along with Stephen Dunifer. So, are there any celebrated cases of ongoing resistance to the FCC? Are there people who may get shut down and then move on and do it in more guerrilla fashion out of the trunk of a car, moving it around? Give us some, some stories about how this works.
Well, you mentioned Stephen Dunifer, and he's probably one of the most celebrated cases. He began just broadcasting in the Berkeley Hills in California out of his backpack. And he was broadcasting from up high on the hills into the city.
I've been up on the top there, looking out over the bay.
He eventually put together Free Radio Berkeley, and for many years was challenging the FCC and claiming the right to broadcast. He eventually was shut down by the FCC after several years, but he opened up a space for many people to come on when it was still legally sort of a hazy area and people weren't sure whether the FCC could, in fact, shut him down. He was claiming a constitutional right to free speech.
Is it still a hazy area? Is it pretty solidified now as things get a little more conservative or have in the country? Is there some legal question about whether or not people ought to be able to do what we call pirate radio?
Well, I think one of the things that is different now than was the case then is low-power FM licenses are legal to some extent. And there is a LPFM program in existence that the FCC has put together. In my opinion, the reason the FCC put it together was to squelch the pirate radio movement. Essentially, they offered free legal licenses to people who had been part of the movement, and there were a number of those people who were very glad to get them. But there were other people who weren't in it to get a license. They were radio pirates, and that's what they wanted to be, and they wanted to subvert the airwaves in that way.
How difficult is it to get a low-power radio license from the FCC?
Well, if you live in Chicago, it's impossible. And urban areas don't have access to those licenses. And typically the people who get those licenses are either the religious right or established organizations that are organizations with a high public profile of respectability. And the majority of those licenses go to stations like that. There is a group called Prometheus Radio, which tries to promote more stations like the one you're involved with, that are offering a little different perspective. But for the most part, those stations are pretty mainstream.